Good luck editing this.
Oh, it'll be fine.
Okay. Hi, I'm Helen Fox.
And I'm Corey Fox.
Welcome to Poetry for Life. This is our poetry podcast where we help you analyze and connect to poetry. Today we're going to be looking at Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden.
Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold, splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold, and polish my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Did any emotions or feelings come up for you during the reading?
I think maybe some melancholy.
Okay.
Or maybe some lingering sadness and anger. Some reminiscence. I'm not sure that's an emotion, but...
Nostalgia?
Yeah, but it's not quite as positive as nostalgia. It's kind of like a mixed nostalgia. Because I'm not sure it's a longing for the past. What about you?
Yeah, I feel it's almost stoic. Stoic's not really an emotion, but it's kind of clinical almost.
Really?
Yeah. Sundays too. It's like he's recounting. It's like an accounting of. But the feelings, I guess I also get regret. There at the end, humility, and it's like unexpressed gratitude. And maybe a sense of grace, that the speaker has experienced this grace that he didn't really appreciate at the time. Like you said, kind of a longing or a reminiscence. What would you say about the subject?
I think it's about memory.
Okay.
And I think it's about... Yeah, as you said, the speaker is looking back on previous experience, maybe as a child or teen, and the speaker is now an adult. So, yeah, I think it's about memory, and I think it's about family, and I think it's about responsibility.
I'm almost wondering, did the speaker just experience something that kind of reignited this memory for him? It almost feels like a realization. He's kind of working through this. He remembered that thing, and then he had a feeling, and now he's reflecting on it.
Yes. First of all, if we want to start with form, 3 stanzas stand out to me.
Right.
And
do you think it doesn't really have a defined form? It's not like a villanelle or a sonnet or something like that. But it definitely has a form, like you said, the 3 stanzas. So I noticed there's, 5 lines, 4 lines, 5 lines. So he's coming back. And the other thing I looked at as far as the form goes is like the meter or the syllable count in each line. And it starts off 10. So I'm thinking, well, okay, is he going to continue that throughout the poem? And it's kind of random. It's kind of mixed. But there's a couple lines that stood out to me as far as the meter goes, the number of syllables in the line, is that 3rd line, then with cracked hands that ached, and then the 5th line, where he says, banked fires blaze, and then no one ever thanked him. It's 3 syllables and 6 syllables. So there's that kind of echo, 6 syllable. And I think that line is kind of important, and we can talk about that a little more in a bit. But
that's a good point. Yeah.
There's no rhyme really to speak of. There's no end rhyme.
No end rhyme.
So it gives kind of a narrative.
Some enjambments. being used.
Yep.
But the form, it doesn't really, there's not a lot that stands out to me about it because it's not, as you said, it's not like a structured form.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that, there's no end rhyme and it's not really a strict form. The syllable count's not the same. It's kind of loose in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, when I look at that and I say, why did he break it up like this? Why did the author break it up like this? And I can only speculate, but it's like 5 lines, 4 lines, 5 lines. He's coming back to something. And I also noticed that the first stanza is really my father. And the second stanza is really me. And then the last stanza, both people are present. So I think that's kind of why it's separated like that. Here's what my father did. Here's what I did. And this is how I'm now feeling about it.
I think that speaks to the form very well.
He's kind of stripping it down, right? I'm going to tell you about something that happened, and I'm going to give it some kind of framing, but I'm not really going to put a lot of, cleverness in this. This is raw.
I think the author is trying to highlight the simplicity of the tasks, but the simplicity of the form shows their importance,
mm-hmm.
I think. Also, how much they mean, how important they are.
So maybe the simplicity of the form is inversely proportional to the profoundness of the emotional experience he's having.
Yes.
Something like that. He's trying to limit the intrusion of form per se on the thing he's trying to communicate. Is really trying to land that last 2 lines, the question.
I think the images and the feeling and the sensory description take precedence over any kind of form. He doesn't need a complex form here.
Yeah. He's doing everything with the senses, I guess.
I think so.
With the imagery.
I think so.
Yeah.
The imagery is one of the first things that stuck out to me that I highlighted. The blue, black, cold, cracked hands, aching, banked fires blaze, cold, splintering, breaking, good shoes. Those are some images that really situate me in like just a kind of humble common house setting.
Mm-hmm.
And with a father that's working hard but not being kind of thanked or as normal, these things that are kind of expected. But the cracked hands, the aching, the cold kind of breaking him.
The thread through the whole poem is the cold and that ack sound. Because that's kind of what you hear, the splintering, breaking. That K is kind of what it's harsh, and it kind of it almost tenses us up.
He does use consonants, alliteration, and assonance throughout the poem. I think to emphasize the cold, but I also think the juxtaposition is there with the fire and the warmth that the father's providing, and the alliteration of weekday weather and when the rooms were warm.
Oh, yeah,
and
I missed
banked blaze. So there is like this kind of contrast between the harshness and then some pleasantness that the father's providing with the pleasant sounds of alliteration. Symbolism to me comes up like as another device. The cracked hands, I think hands symbolize the work, the effort, the maybe labor that the father is putting into his family and his life and to support them, not only like with the fire, but also just maybe with his work.
Yeah, Sundays too.
Yeah, Sundays too. That word really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Stuck out to me like two as well,
it's
right?
Almost like, you use two when you're adding on to a point, but he's opening with it.
Yes.
So it's like he really wants to drive home right off the bat 7 days a week.
Because it's also weekday. He says labor in the weekday weather. So he's emphasizing that it's Sunday and he's just worked the week and he's still working.
In the weather.
Too. In the weather. Right. And that's why I'm thinking the manual labor, something outdoors, right. Maybe. The fire could also be a symbol for the love that he's providing in kind of a physical way.
Right.
Or
because it sounds like, maybe their home life wasn't all that great.
Yeah.
The chronic angers of that house. In each stanza we have the word cold. And in the first stanza, the fires blaze. The second stanza, the rooms were warm. And the third stanza doesn't have anything explicitly fire, but it's kind of, he joins them both when he says, who had driven out the cold. The cold is part of the idea there, but it's like connected directly to his father's effort, that his father had driven it out.
Yeah, so I think fire could be a symbol. Even the cold could be a symbol. And I think the good shoes are an interesting symbol as well.
Yeah, what do you make of that line?
And polished my gold shoes. Well,
good shoes.
I mean, sorry. and polished my good shoes. So something interesting, I think, is the sh sound there. Polished, and good shoes. Right? It is making the sound.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Onomatopoeia. I think the good shoes symbolize how the father is taking care of the humble tasks, like the tasks that need to be done, right, have to be done to keep the family warm. He's also doing things that help the family progress. The good shoes, maybe good shoes that he's wearing to school or wearing to church or wearing to more formal occasions. So it really represents the range of responsibilities and tasks that the father has. What do you think?
I think the good shoes is really setting up or driving home the point that they don't really have much. Maybe that's why there are chronic angers. They don't have much to work with or to do, but they have to work. He has to work a lot in order to maintain what little they do have. And I think that kind of the good shoes kind of sets up that word austere to really have a powerful feeling. So I know what the word austere means in context. Like I can get the kind of the connotation, but I looked up the definition just to see, this is not a word you use all the time. Oxford Languages said, austere is strict in manner, attitude, or appearance, having no comforts or luxuries, harsh or aesthetic, having an extremely plain and simple style or appearance. So I think the one that fits most is like having no comforts or luxuries.
Something that came up for me when you were talking about the word austere is this idea of Sundays. Sunday, too, I think is an interesting day to emphasize those winter Sundays. Because usually we think of Sundays, at least in the U.S. or Judeo-Christian societies, as like a day of rest, right? It kind of, to me, has some kind of contrast, right? The working on a Sunday and love, which we think of as being luxurious, maybe being exciting. Instead, he's saying love's austere, plain, harsh reality. So I'm noticing some contrast and also maybe some emphasis of how their life is kind of, the life that he's remembering is harsh, even on Sundays.
But that doesn't mean there wasn't love there. Yeah, I also think it's interesting that word offices on a Sunday.
Exactly. Responsibility, work, needs, and duty. Another device that I do think comes up here is personification. I do think it is more subtle, but I think there are 3 interesting examples of it. One is the cold splintering and breaking. Another, I think, is the chronic angers of that house, showing that the house contains or is angry. We understand it to be the people in the house. But what it's implying is that the house is angry.
It actually is connecting the angers almost to the splintering and breaking.
And then the last one is love's austere and lonely offices. This is implying that love has these lonely duties. And it is the idea of love that's containing that. And the speaker, from an adult perspective, is reflecting on the fact that he, at that time, didn't know about that aspect of love. Lately, I've been running into instances like this where it's uncertain. Is it personification? Is it not? And oftentimes when I check, it does come back as personification. Even if you're questioning it a little bit, I do think that personification can get also a little bit muddy with metaphor sometimes as well.
Especially when the metaphor is so strong, it kind of dampens the personification.
It does, yes. Going back a little bit to punctuation, at the end of stanza 1, there's the in stopped line, right? It blaze, and then him banked fires blaze, and then no one ever thanked him. That's such a harsh in stopped line.
That whole line is harsh. Like, banked fires blaze.
Yes. And then there's another in stopped line after that. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering breaking. And so that kind of separates the father from the son. But then at the end of this stanza, there's a comma instead of a period. Fearing the chronic angers of that house, comma, space, Caesura, speaking indifferently to him, comma. So this almost connects them slightly, the father and the son. But it does show also the distance between them because there's a whole space between the stanzas.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
And then also the repetition of what did I know, what did I know? The anaphora there too, really emphasizing the last punchline.
It really adds to that effect of regret and humility. I'm realizing now that I was acting out of ignorance, speaking indifferently to him. I should have thanked him. Instead of being so indifferent. Right.
Yeah, indifferent, speaking indifferently to him.
Right.
Who had driven out the cold.
Right.
And polished my good shoes.
Maybe the what did I know is both for the driving out the cold and polishing the good shoes.
Should I do my list of themes?
Yeah.
Okay, thematic ideas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Spit for rapid fire.
Okay. Youth, adulthood, responsibility, pain, conflict, parenthood, cold, warmth, anger, memory. Do you want to add any?
Hold on a sec.
One of the reasons why I do this is because teachers oftentimes cannot agree on how to define theme. Some teachers define it as one-word topics, but some teachers define it as a message conveyed through the text, which is what a theme really is. So instead of saying theme is all of that, I say thematic messages are statements that the text is conveying, messages that the text is conveying, which is the hard part for students oftentimes. But that's where the good meat is, to learn how to get there, and you get there through the theme, like
would you say that a better thematic statement incorporates more of the what'd you call a single statement? Just like the single topic words.
Right.
So a thematic message would be a statement that incorporates many.
Right. The more thematic ideas you can incorporate, the more complex your thematic message becomes. And it doesn't need to be overly complex, but combining two is often a good idea. So let's look at some thematic messages then.
Okay.
What do you think this poem is saying? Another way to think about it is, what's your interpretation?
Like the naivety of youth causes us to not recognize the depth of devotion that people can achieve.
Yes.
Something like that.
That's great. I would say that the rhetorical question at the end implies the answer nothing. Mm-hmm. What did I know of the us, how love is austere and lonely? Nothing. He didn't know anything. So I think that we can come to that conclusion. I had a very similar one. We take our parents' sacrifices for granted when we're young, and the naivety of youth tells us nothing of what is required for parenting, marriage, and real love. Also, thematic messages can be controversial. You could come up with two different interpretations of the same work that are opposite even. I really liked yours, though.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I did it. I got an A, guys. I got an A.
Recently, I've read another poem that really speaks to this same theme and thematic message, and it is Raincoat by Ada Limon. It's an also very similar reflection of an adult looking back on a childhood experience about parental sacrifice. And I think that there's other poems about this too. I think it's not an uncommon thing for a poet to write about. In fact, you could probably find a lot of poems on this topic. Yeah. That could be a very interesting exploration.
Yeah, almost like a meta-analysis of this theme.
Yes.
Across a number of poems.
Yes.
I think you're right. I think there are a lot of poems that have this kind of reflection.
That'd be cool.
And it definitely taps into something that I know I have experienced. And I wonder to what extent the feeling that I'm having is connected to like that dynamic between father and son. The reason this poem kind of speaks to me so strongly is my father was very similar to his father in that he was a hard worker. I mean, my dad would leave for work at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, get home at 6 o'clock, eat dinner, and go onto his computer and work until 10. So, and it was just kind of assumed, that's what Dad was going to be doing the rest of the day and for the week. It's impossible to appreciate what your parents do for you when you're a child. It's just impossible, because if they're parenting well, then what they're doing is kind of shielding you from that harshness of life.
I agree. I think that when you're young, you don't, for most people, see your parents' sacrifices, and you're not really supposed to as a kid. I mean, I think that is also kind of brought up in this poem. This tension between parenthood being like a lot of responsibility and a lot of things being expected, and also maybe some parts of parenting that aren't going as well.
It's easy to see the negatives of your parents when you're a kid, but it's not so easy to see everything, the sacrifices and the positive things that they're doing for you to keep you alive, to make sure you're educated and fed and a well-rounded person.
Yes. I also know I didn't recognize those things when I was a kid either, of how hard my parents worked and how much they sacrificed. And that's why I do think it's a common poem topic.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about Robert Hayden?
Yes,
Great.
I'd love to. So Robert Hayden was born in 1913 and died in 1980. He was born in Detroit, and he was actually raised by his neighbors, not his parents, not his biological parents. And his upbringing was tough. He experienced violence. His allusion to the chronic angers in the household is autobiographical. And he was bullied in school because of his struggle with his eyesight. And so books were a form of solace for him. He was also the first Black writer to hold the position of poetry consultant to the Library of Congress, which was the position before the poet laureate. And he died at 66 in 1980. he does write about race and poverty in other poems, but he considered himself to be more an American poet than African American poet, which was a little controversial and attracted some criticism at the time. But one interesting fact about him that I thought stood out is that he is of the Baha'i faith. This significantly informed his identity since the early 1940s in his life. The Baha'i faith values the indivisibility of humankind. So I think the universality of this poem comes through and connects to that.
Yeah. So that wraps up this episode of Poetry for Life. Thanks for tuning in.
If you have a suggestion for our next poem, comment down below. Thanks for watching.
Bye. Doesn't he know we're trying to film a video?